My name is Claire, and for most of my life, I believed I knew my son better than anyone else. Ethan was the center of my world, my anchor during the storms of divorce and single parenthood. From the moment I first held him, tiny fingers curling tightly around mine, I swore nothing would ever come between us. Now he's 21, tall like his father, with my sharp jawline and a smile that still feels boyish despite the man he's becoming. To the outside world, Ethan is disciplined, clever, a young man with promise. To me, he will always be the boy who begged for one more bedtime story, or who used to fall asleep on the porch swing with a comic book spread across his chest. But lately, something has shifted. The lightness in him has dimmed. His laughter, once so frequent, has grown rare, replaced by distracted silences. He avoids my eyes when we talk, answering my questions with clipped phrases. His phone buzzes at odd hours, and he slips out of the house late at night, returning with an unfamiliar scent, clinging faintly to his clothes. I told myself it was just stress from his final year at college. Exams, deadlines, the usual. Young men deserve their privacy, I reminded myself. But beneath the surface, worry gnawed at me. This wasn't just stress. This was something he didn't want me to see. One evening, while straightening his room, a motherly habit he always teased me for, I found an envelope hidden beneath his pillow. It was worn around the edges, as though it had been handled many times. My breath caught as I slid the contents free. Inside was a photograph. Ethan stood beside a woman I didn't recognize. She was striking, older, elegant, with a beauty that commanded attention. There was no awkwardness between them, no space that suggested formality. His hand brushed against hers with ease, as though it belonged there. On the back of the photo, in hurried scrawl, were words that chilled me. For us. No matter the cost. My heart pounded as I stared at the picture. This wasn't a harmless crush or fleeting infatuation. This was deeper, riskier, and above all, it was hidden. That night at dinner, I studied Ethan carefully. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, his fork pushing food around his plate. But what unsettled me most was his silence. His gaze, once open and steady, now carried a weight I couldn't name. In that moment, I realized the conflict before me was no longer about whether my son was keeping secrets. It was about whether I was ready to uncover them, because the truth has a way of destroying the illusions we cling to, and my illusion of knowing Ethan was already beginning to fracture. That night, I hardly slept. The photograph sat in my nightstand drawer, burning in my mind like a secret I had stolen. Every sound of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the groan of the floorboards felt amplified, as though the silence itself demanded answers. By morning, I resolved to confront Ethan. Yet when he shuffled into the kitchen, hair tousled, phone in hand, my resolve wavered. He looked so young, so tired, and for a fleeting second, I almost convinced myself I had imagined everything. Ethan, I began cautiously, pouring coffee neither of us would drink. Is everything okay? You've seemed different lately. His smile was thin, practiced. Just school, Mom. Don't worry. But the quick flick of his eyes toward the counter, the way his hands tightened around his mug, told me otherwise. He was hiding something. Later that day, after he left for class, I searched his bag, a violation I hated but one I couldn't resist. Amid textbooks and crumpled papers, I found a small notebook. Most pages were filled with scribbles of formulas and essay notes, but wedged between them were fragments of writing that made my chest tighten. Her voice feels like the only truth I can trust. If anyone finds out, everything falls apart. The words weren't addressed to me, yet they pierced like accusations. Who was this woman? And why did my son, my Ethan, believe their connection carried such risk? That evening I tried again. At dinner, I set the notebook gently on the table between us. His fork froze midair. Where did you get that? His voice was sharp, unrecognizable. I found it in your bag, I admitted, my own voice trembling. Ethan, please. I'm your mother. I need to understand what's happening. For a long moment he said nothing. His face hardened, then softened, then broke into something raw and frightened. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling as though searching for words he couldn't bear to say. Finally, his gaze returned to me. His eyes were glassy, his jaw tight. "You wouldn't understand," he whispered. "Then make me understand," I pleaded. He exhaled slowly, like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "Her name is Rachel," he said at last. "She's not just someone from school, she's more." I gripped the table, the name echoing in my head. Rachel, a name that carried both promise and danger, a name that instantly became the center of the storm I had only begun to glimpse. Before I could respond, Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "That's all I can say right now," he muttered, retreating down the hall. The slam of his door left the house trembling. And me, sitting alone at the table, staring at the notebook, knowing the truth was closer, but that it would cost me dearly to uncover it. The name lingered in the air long after Ethan's door slammed shut. Rachel. It was simple, ordinary, and yet it carried the weight of something forbidden. I whispered it to myself, testing how it felt on my tongue. Rachel. Whoever she was, she had already claimed a piece of my son that I could no longer reach. The following days were a blur of watching and waiting. Ethan moved through the house like a shadow, his phone always within reach, his attention elsewhere. Conversations became rehearsed exchanges. How was class? Met with fine. Will you be home for dinner? Answered with not sure. His evasions built walls I couldn't climb, and behind those walls lived a secret consuming him. One Friday evening, he didn't come home until nearly midnight. I sat in the living room with only the lamp for company, my chest tightening each time headlights flickered across the window. When the front door finally opened, Ethan stepped inside, flushed and distracted. He froze when he saw me waiting. "You've been out late again," I said, keeping my voice calm. He shrugged, kicking off his shoes. "Group project," I studied his face. The lie was too neat, too practiced. "Group projects don't leave perfume on your shirt." His head snapped up, eyes wide. For a moment, I thought he might confess everything. Instead, his expression hardened. "Stop snooping, Mom. You don't get it." I swallowed my anger, though it burned hot in my chest. "Then help me get it. Tell me the truth about Rachel." The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head. "It's complicated," he muttered, retreating toward his room. The door clicked shut, and I was left staring at the hallway, feeling the sting of defeat. But his words, "it's complicated," were confirmation enough. Rachel wasn't just a name. She was real, she was present, and she was dangerous. The next morning, while gathering laundry, I noticed Ethan's jacket crumpled in the corner. In the pocket, I found a folded receipt from a downtown cafe. Scrawled across the back was a number and a single initial, R. My pulse quickened. This was no longer speculation. This was evidence. I imagined Ethan sitting across from her at that cafe, their heads bent close, sharing secrets over coffee. The thought pierced me with equal parts fear and sorrow. That evening, Ethan emerged from his room dressed sharply, too sharply for a casual night out. His hair was styled, his shirt freshly pressed. When he reached for his keys, I asked softly, "You're going to see her, aren't you?" He froze, caught off guard. His lips parted, but no denial came. Instead, he gave me a look I had never seen before, equal parts guilt and defiance. Then he turned and walked out the door. I stood at the window long after his car disappeared into the night, clutching the receipt in my hand. The truth was inching closer, and I knew when it finally arrived it would change everything. The cafe receipt sat on my nightstand like a loaded weapon. I must have unfolded and refolded it 100 times, tracing the faint ink of the phone number with trembling fingers. Every instinct screamed at me to call, to demand answers from the woman who had entangled my son in her web. But when the moment finally came, I didn't call. I went. That Saturday afternoon, I drove downtown, my pulse thundering in my ears. The cafe was crowded with students, couples, and solitary readers, but my eyes found her instantly. Rachel. She was exactly as the photograph had suggested. Elegant, magnetic, the kind of woman who drew attention without asking for it. She sat at a corner table sipping coffee, her gaze flicking toward the door every few minutes as if expecting someone. Then Ethan walked in. The sight of him striding toward her, his face lighting up in a way it hadn't in months, stole the breath from my lungs. I froze, torn between the urge to march across the room and the need to remain unseen. When he leaned down and kissed her cheek, a jolt of disbelief shot through me. This wasn't a harmless crush. This was intimacy. I slipped outside before either of them could notice me. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped my keys. My son was involved with a woman who wasn't just older. She was married. I had seen the ring glinting on her hand when she lifted her cup. That evening, when Ethan returned home, I was waiting. The silence in the house was suffocating. He tried to pass me in the hallway, but I stepped into his path, the photograph clutched in my hand. "Enough," I said, my voice low, steady. "I saw you today, at the cafe, with her." His face drained of color. "Mom, don't lie to me, Ethan. She's married, isn't she?" He swallowed hard, shoulders slumping as though the weight of his secret finally crushed him. "Yes," he whispered. "She's married, but I love her. And she loves me." The words struck like knives. I searched his eyes, desperate to find the boy I once knew. The boy who brought me flowers from the yard, who whispered promises that he'd never hurt me.
Instead, I saw a young man blinded by a love that threatened to devour him. Love?
My voice cracked. Do you even understand what that word means? This isn't love, Ethan. This is betrayal. For her husband. For her family. For you. His hands trembled, his eyes glistening. You don't get it. She says she'll leave him. She says we have a future. I pressed the photograph against his chest. And what if she doesn't? What happens then? What will you have left? He looked away, but the silence was answer enough. For the first time, I realized the depth of the battle before me wasn't just about Rachel. It was about saving my son from destroying himself. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if I could. The house felt different after that night, quieter, heavier, as though the walls themselves had absorbed our argument. Ethan kept to his room, venturing out only when necessary, his presence reduced to shadows and closed doors. I longed to reach for him, to hold him as I once did when his nightmares were simple things, easily chased away with a lullaby. But this nightmare was real, and no melody could soothe it. Days passed. Then one evening, I heard the soft knock on my bedroom door. Ethan stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed red. For the first time in weeks, he looked less like a man determined to defend his choices, and more like the boy who once sought comfort in my arms. "She ended it," he said quietly. His voice cracked on the last word. "Rachel, she said she can't leave him, that it's over." The relief that washed over me was tangled with grief. I pulled him into an embrace, his body trembling against mine. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure whether I was apologizing for his heartbreak or for failing to protect him from it. He wept silently, and I let him. Sometimes a mother's only power is to bear witness to her child's pain. In the days that followed, Ethan moved through life like someone learning to walk again. His laughter returned in small fragments, hesitant at first, then stronger. He buried himself in schoolwork, in friends, in anything that would keep the memory of her from clawing its way back. And though I knew healing would not be swift, I saw glimmers of the young man I had nearly lost to a love built on deception. Yet even in his recovery, I wrestled with my own questions. What had Rachel sought in him? Escape? Validation? Revenge against a failing marriage? I would never know, and perhaps I didn't want to. What mattered was that she had left my son with scars invisible to the world, but vivid to me. One night, as we sat together on the porch, the same porch where he once fell asleep with comics in his lap, he spoke softly. "You were right, Mom. It wasn't love. It felt like it, but it wasn't. I think I just wanted to be seen." I placed my hand over his. "And you always will be. Even when you lose yourself, I'll see you." The stars stretched wide above us, silent witnesses to our fragile peace. For the first time in months, I felt the bond between us knit back together. Not unbroken, but stronger for its fracture. Still, as I watched him stare into the night, I knew life would hand him more secrets, more heartbreaks, more truths he might try to shield from me, and I knew I couldn't stop it. Being a mother is not about preventing every fall. It's about being there when they rise again. And though Ethan's secret had nearly broken us, it also reminded me of the most painful truth of all. Sometimes love means letting go, even when your heart aches to hold on.